Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where the sun rises over the endless sands of the Nile, painting the desert in soft golds and pale pinks. You trudge barefoot across warm, gritty soil, inhaling the scent of fresh bread baking in clay ovens and the faint tang of papyrus along the riverbanks. You probably won't survive this if you're imagining yourself as a pharaoh, since your survival skills at navigating mud, sandals, and unpredictable crocodile sightings are questionable at best. Yet here you are, ready to immerse yourself in the rhythm of daily life in an ancient Egyptian village, where each movement, each sound, and each whisper of wind has a story to tell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share in the comments your location and local time, so we can drift through history together in real time. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins quietly, with the first light stretching over the horizon. You can feel the warmth creep over your skin as villagers emerge from mud brick homes, shaking out mats, tending small hearths, and carrying pitchers of water drawn from the Nile's gentle current. Chickens cluck nervously, and a donkey brays somewhere off in the distance, reminding you that this world is alive in subtle ways. Women kneel by shallow basins, washing clothes, occasionally pausing to adjust the folds of their linen tunics. Men gather ropes, baskets, and simple tools, preparing to head to the fields or the workshops, their movements economical yet deliberate, honed by years of routine. Even children have assigned tasks, chasing stray geese, stacking reeds, or fetching water from communal wells, learning the ways of village life before they even notice it. You step lightly along the sandy path, careful not to disturb the rhythm, feeling the granular warmth of earth beneath your feet, and noticing the tiny details, a stray cat winding around sandals, the glint of sunlight on polished bronze amulets, the faint smell of baking bread mingling with river reeds. Historians still argue whether village artisans had formal apprenticeships or simply learned through observation and imitation, but as you watch, the process seems intuitive, almost meditative. The village's social rhythm unfolds naturally. Elderly men sit in the shade of date palms, leaning on staffs, exchanging quiet conversation, while younger men head to work in the fields or along the riverbank. You catch glimpses of water jars glinting in the morning light, reeds being bundled for roofing, and baskets carefully loaded with vegetables or fish. Even in this ordinary flow, there are quirks. A cat swipes a fish, a child darts to chase a bird, and a dog barks at its own shadow. The simple unpredictability of daily life punctuates the meditative rhythm, reminding you that even in a structured society, chaos sneaks in and adds texture. Food preparation is another sensory layer. You notice women grinding grain with stone mortars, the gritty powder filling the air with a slightly nutty scent. Water is drawn from shallow pools, stirred to clarity and poured into clay jars for storage. Bread loaves are scored with simple patterns, crosses, lines, or small sun motifs, and then set to bake in open hearths. There's a quiet humor in watching the baker pat a particularly stubborn dough into submission, grumbling under his breath in a way that seems oddly relatable across millennia. Scholars debate whether these early breads were daily staples or reserved for ceremonial purposes, but the smell tells you they are central to life here, bridging sustenance and ritual. You begin to sense the connection between the natural environment and human activity. The sun is climbing steadily, casting long shadows that stretch across sand and stone. You notice the birds on the rooftops, the flicker of light through palm fronds, and the occasional splash of water as fish jump in the Nile. These moments are not just background, they define the day's rhythm. You imagine villagers tracking the sun's position unconsciously, orienting their movements to shadow and light, measuring time without clocks, and it feels both intimate and vast. You remember, almost fondly, that later in the day, priests will interpret the shadows with solemnity, reading messages from Ra himself. Even chores become meditative. Children carry water with a sense of ceremony, the splashing rhythm marking seconds in their playful calculus. Adults sweep the courtyards, their brooms tracing slow arcs across sun-warmed floors. You can hear the soft scratching of reeds against mud, the distant murmur of conversation, and the occasional bray or cluck. There's humor here if you choose to see it. A chicken suddenly dashes through a line of neatly stacked baskets, or a boy trips over a reed bundle, laughter spilling into the air. Life in the village is structured, yes, but it's never dull, and you can feel the pulse of humanity in these gentle, small disruptions. Historians still argue whether daily life was primarily dictated by environmental necessity or social hierarchy, but standing here, you can sense the intertwined layers. Villagers navigate not just physical spaces, but social rituals, inherited knowledge, and unspoken etiquette. Every interaction, from greeting a neighbor to tending a hearth, carries meaning beyond mere survival. You can almost feel the subtle choreography, hands moving deftly, voices softening in reverence near sacred spaces, and a collective attentiveness to rhythm and routine. You notice the smallest details, like the careful stacking of reeds for shade or the precise pouring of water into clay jars, and recognize them as threads in a complex, quiet tapestry of life. By early morning, the sun has warmed the village thoroughly, and the hum of activity reaches a gentle crescendo. The baker's loaves are golden, the river shimmers under sunlight, and the smell of bread, herbs, and river reeds mixes into a calm yet vivid sensory landscape. You take a deep breath, noticing how the warm air carries both dust and sweetness, the smell grounding you in this moment. As you walk along narrow alleys observing villagers at work, you begin to feel part of the rhythm, like an unnoticed chord in a living melody. Quirky moments continue to surface. A child balances precariously on a low wall, a dog steals a loaf and is promptly chased, and you chuckle softly at these small, timeless dramas. Your imagination begins filling gaps in the narrative. You picture the sounds that cannot be captured, whispers of prayers, distant drums signaling market time, and the subtle creak of boats tethered along the riverbank. Each sound, each movement becomes a layer of immersion, and you notice how the village's gentle chaos is ordered by centuries of habit and custom. Observing a woman grind grain with rhythmic precision, you imagine how that small motion has repeated for generations, creating continuity and comfort in an ever-changing natural world. Scholars debate whether rituals were practical or symbolic, but watching them in real time, you feel both. By late morning, shadows grow shorter, and the day begins hinting at midday rest. Villagers pause, gathering under palm fronds or in shaded courtyards, exchanging brief conversations. You notice a quiet, almost sleepy energy settling over the scene. The river laps lazily, a soft undertone to the meditative sounds of daily life. Even the sun seems to move slower, casting gentle warmth without harshness. You imagine villagers tracking the sun's position unconsciously, orienting their movements to shadow and light, measuring time without clocks, and it feels both intimate and vast.
You follow the baker from the village square to a quieter courtyard, where he keeps a small collection of tools, each one worn and polished by years of use. You notice the slender shadow stick resting at a precise angle against a low wall, its tip pointing toward a faint line etched into the stone. It's simple, almost comically minimalist, a stick and a mark, but it's enough. Ancient Egyptians used such devices to track the sun's movement, marking time not in minutes, but in gradually shifting shadows. As you lean closer, the fine grooves scratched into the stone catch the light, and you imagine generations of villagers squinting at them, adjusting their daily chores according to these tiny, dependable cues. Historians still argue whether these instruments were accurate enough to schedule complex tasks, or if their main purpose was ritualistic, reinforcing the sacred connection between sunlight and human activity. You pick up a small merkhet, a wooden sighting tool, and hold it up as if aligning the stars above. The tool feels surprisingly heavy considering its simplicity, and you wonder at the patience required to use it properly. Priests reportedly used merkhets in pairs, sighting along the night sky to determine hours, dates, or even the best time to plant crops. There's a quirky detail here. Some merkhets were cleverly disguised as decorative objects for the wealthy, like small staves with inlaid ivory or ebony, suggesting that practicality and prestige often walked hand in hand. You trace your fingers along the polished wood, imagining a young apprentice learning to read the heavens while avoiding the occasional distraction of a particularly persistent cat in the courtyard. By mid-morning, shadows are already stretching, and the stick in the courtyard is showing its first long line. You crouch beside it, noticing the subtle curve cast across the sand, a delicate dance between geometry and sunlight. It's fascinating how a simple stick can divide the day, a reminder that the Egyptians' understanding of time was observational rather than abstract. You remember reading that they divided daytime into 12 hours, but the actual length of an hour varied with the season. Some hours felt long in winter and short in summer, which seems oddly flexible compared to our rigid clocks, but it makes sense when you think of life guided by nature rather than numbers. Historians still debate the methods used to ensure consistency across different regions, but here in this quiet courtyard, it seems almost irrelevant. You wander to another corner, where a group of scribes hunch over papyrus, marking diagrams and notes. They observe the shadow's movement and record tiny increments, combining practical necessity with meticulous artistry. One scribe glances up at you as if to say, "Don't touch my work, it's magic," which feels surprisingly relatable. There's a fringe theory that some merkhets doubled as teaching tools, letting apprentices grasp both geometry and astronomy in one gentle lesson. Watching them, you imagine tracing invisible lines with your finger across the sunlit courtyard, a slow-motion game connecting earth and sky. The air carries the faint aroma of reed ink and dust, mingling into a smell that is both grounding and slightly mysterious.
The afternoon sun has mellowed, and you stroll toward a temple whose limestone walls glow softly in the warm light. You notice how the sun casts elongated shadows across the facade, turning engraved hieroglyphs into playful silhouettes. Walking along the path, you can almost hear the faint rustle of linen robes and sandals against stone, and the distant murmur of chanting as priests move in measured patterns. The sunlight itself seems to carry significance here, more than just illumination. It is an actor, a guide, and a spiritual marker. Egyptians believed that Ra, the sun god, sailed across the sky each day, bringing life and order, and you feel that narrative subtly shaping every movement in the courtyard. Historians still argue whether shadow worship was more symbolic than functional, but as you linger, it's hard to separate the two. You pause to watch the shadow of a tall obelisk stretch across the temple floor. It's elegant, almost teasing in its simplicity, yet it serves as a precise instrument for tracking hours, ceremonial timings, or even seasonal festivals. You notice a quirk. One particularly small shadow mark seems to wobble slightly at midday, leading villagers to tell humorous stories about Ra momentarily napping and the sun misbehaving. You smile, imagining a priest nudging a colleague and whispering, "See, even the gods need a break." The balance of precision and playfulness is subtle, yet it suffuses every stone, carving, and gesture around you.
As you wander deeper into the temple, you catch sight of priests manipulating sundials, merkhets, and shadow sticks. Each device is carefully calibrated, sometimes in pairs, sometimes standing alone. You notice the tactile nature of the work, wood and stone polished smooth, inked lines and tiny carvings marking minutes and hours, and a faint dusting of sand from the courtyard. Fringe studies suggest that some shadow sticks doubled as astrological teaching tools, letting young apprentices connect celestial patterns to earthly life in a single, contemplative exercise. Watching them, you feel an almost meditative calm, as if time itself were slowing to match the movement of shadow across stone. The gardens beckon, their tranquility a soft counterpoint to the structured measurement of time. Lotus blooms hover above shallow pools, their petals opening and closing with a delicate rhythm. You inhale the sweet, watery scent, noticing how each plant casts tiny, dappled shadows that shift as the sun moves. Some scholars argue that garden placement mirrored cosmic principles, arranging flora in ways that reflected celestial balance. Others suggest the designs were purely aesthetic, a space for leisure and contemplation. Either way, walking among these quiet pools, the gentle sound of water lapping its stone edges, you feel a profound link between observation, beauty, and spiritual reflection. You notice the priests performing their rituals, hands raised to trace the sun's arc, lips moving in soft incantations. Occasionally, one glances at a shadow stick, adjusting its angle minutely, as though checking the alignment of heaven and earth. The curious part is that some rituals incorporated tiny whimsical elements, painted cats, miniature obelisks, or feathered charms meant to correct the sun's course if Ra felt mischievous. It's both earnest and playful, reflecting a culture where humor, observation, and reverence coexisted in subtle harmony. You breathe deeply, letting the scent of lotus and warmed limestone settle into your senses. You wander to a shaded colonnade where carved reliefs illustrate gods interacting with mortals. Shadows from columns ripple across the walls, creating a soft, animated effect as the sun drifts lower. You notice a small, curious carving of a sunboat, its tiny crew, both human and divine, casting micro-shadows on the stone, reminding you that light, art, and function often intersected seamlessly. Historians still debate the symbolic meaning of these carvings. Were they instructive, devotional, or simply decorative? Observing them now in the shifting light, you feel the layers of intent intertwine effortlessly. The gentle lapping of the river nearby mingles with the muted sound of temple chants, and you notice the rhythmic movement of shadows over a mosaic floor. Each figure, each symbol, shifts as the sun moves, creating a slow-motion dance of light and geometry. Fringe interpretations suggest these shifting shadows were used to determine auspicious times for specific rituals, while others argue it was a byproduct of architectural aesthetics. Either way, you feel yourself lulled by the pattern, a quiet, predictable motion that also allows for gentle surprise, like the way a feather drifts unpredictably on a soft breeze. A child of a priest appears, tracing a tiny shadow on the floor with a finger, giggling quietly as the elongated line wobbles and shifts. It's an endearing reminder that observation is not solely scientific or spiritual. Sometimes it's playful. The shadow stick, the merkhet, and the obelisk all have a dual nature, precise instruments for understanding time and cosmos, yet objects of curiosity and amusement, inviting engagement and gentle learning. You remember the earlier village courtyard, the baker's stick, the scribe's playful notes, and notice the same continuity here, a blend of function, humor, and subtle ritual. The late afternoon sun warms your shoulders as you wander into a small chamber lined with alabaster vessels, each designed to hold oils, perfumes, or sacred waters. Light filters through narrow slits in the walls, casting thin ribbons of shadow across the floor. You notice how priests occasionally align the vessels to catch sunlight in specific ways, enhancing fragrance or visual effect. Some scholars argue these arrangements were functional, aiding in measurements for rituals, while others suggested they were symbolic, creating a visual representation of divine order. You lean back, absorbing the layered interplay of light, scent, and geometry. As evening approaches, the shadows lengthen dramatically. The obelisk in the courtyard now projects a long, elegant line across stone and sand, guiding the final moments of temple activity. Priests perform closing rituals, subtly adjusting instruments to mark the transition from day to night. Fringe stories tell of mischievous spirits stretching shadows at dusk, adding a light-hearted dimension to otherwise solemn proceedings. You feel yourself smiling, imagining the playful negotiation between humans and unseen forces, order and whimsy. The temple is quieter now. The sun dips toward the horizon, bathing the courtyard in amber light. You notice small details, a lizard curling in a shadow's cool edge, the faint glint of ink lines etched into papyrus, the slow sway of lotus blossoms. Even the simplest shadows, the stick in the corner, the pillar's columns, tell stories of time, observation, and human attention to detail. Historians still argue whether daily shadow readings influenced broader architectural or ritual planning, but here the evidence is clear. Life and time are intimately intertwined. Nightfall edges closer, and you find yourself seated on a stone bench, watching the temple shadows fade and stretch, imagining the journey of Ra across the sky. You reflect on how shadow sticks, merkhets, and sundials mediate human understanding of natural cycles, blending science, art, spirituality, and playful observation. A gentle breeze carries the scent of the river and blooming lotus, and you feel the slow, rhythmic cadence of life in this ancient place settle over you. Quirky anecdotes, sleeping cats, mischievous children, wobbly shadow lines soften the precision, making it all feel human and relatable. By the time the last golden rays fade, you are wrapped in the quiet majesty of the temple, the rhythm of shadow and sun, and the gentle humor woven through observation. Every stone, stick, and mark holds a story, subtle yet profound, reminding you that time in ancient Egypt was both measured and experienced, observed and played with. You breathe in slowly, letting the soft, ambient sounds, distant river, faint chants, fluttering leaves settle into your senses as the temple and its shadows linger in your imagination.
You step from the temple courtyard into a walled garden, and immediately the scents shift, sweeter now, softer, a mix of lotus, mint, and freshly tilled soil. Sunlight filters through tall papyrus stalks, casting flickering, almost playful shadows across the smooth stone paths. The garden seems alive in a quiet way. Bees hover above blooms, small birds hop between reeds, and the occasional frog croaks lazily near shallow pools. Walking slowly, you inhale deeply, noting the layered fragrances and imagining how the Egyptians themselves experienced these gardens not just as ornamental spaces, but as places for reflection, learning, and leisure. Historians still argue whether palace gardens were primarily spiritual spaces, practical food sources, or a combination of both, but for now, you can feel the intentional calm they inspired. The paths wind gently, lined with low hedges and flowering plants, many of which you recognize and many that seem entirely foreign. You stoop to touch a soft lotus petal, feeling its cool, delicate texture against your fingertips, and notice a curious hummingbird-sized insect hovering nearby, shimmering in sunlight. Some scholars suggest that specific plants were cultivated not just for aesthetic beauty, but for subtle medicinal properties, while others argue the arrangements were purely ceremonial, designed to mirror the order of the cosmos. You pause to admire a circular pool at the center, where lilies float serenely, reflecting golden sunlight like tiny mirrors, each ripple catching a fragment of sky. As you wander further, a gardener emerges, carrying a basket of fragrant oils, freshly harvested herbs, and tiny papyrus bundles. He hums softly as he arranges the plants, brushing the leaves with gentle hands, and you notice the meticulous care he gives even the smallest shoots. Fringe accounts suggest some of these gardens contained hidden compartments for rare or sacred herbs, known only to select priests or healers. You watch him sprinkle water over the papyrus roots, the droplets glinting in the sun, creating miniature rainbows that dance across stone edges. There's a subtle humor in imagining a tiny, invisible audience of gods observing each droplet's path, nodding in approval, or mild disappointment, depending on the day. You pause to sit on a low stone bench, feeling the sun warm your shoulders and noticing the gentle rustle of leaves. The garden paths are narrow, winding between pools and flower beds, and you find yourself following the patterns of sunlight and shadow across the ground. Some historians debate whether the layout of these gardens was inspired by symbolic representations of the Nile itself, with canals and pools mimicking the river's branching paths. Watching the movement of water and shadow, you can almost see the logic of this design, a natural choreography connecting life, leisure, and spiritual contemplation. A small fountain trickles quietly nearby, the water creating a soft rhythm against stone. You lean in, listening to its gentle melody, and notice a quirky detail. Tiny fish swim in precise patterns, occasionally nudging a floating petal. Some scholars suggest that specific fish were thought to bring good luck or act as tiny ceremonial participants, though scholars still argue whether their inclusion was functional or symbolic. You watch a dragonfly skim the surface, its wings catching the sunlight and reflecting fragments of garden magic in midair. The juxtaposition of playfulness and precision seems quintessentially Egyptian. Life observed, curated, and gently celebrated. Wandering past a line of fragrant herbs, you notice a small patch of blue flowers that you later learned were valued not for scent, but for medicinal application, used in oils or poultices for minor ailments. Some of these plants have peculiar histories, stories of ancient deities or legendary healers who recommended them for curious conditions, like calming restless children or aiding concentration during study. You smile at the thought, imagining a scribe carefully selecting petals to improve focus, while a mischievous cat swipes at the bundle, creating minor chaos. The interweaving of practical use, symbolic meaning, and gentle mischief seems to define this garden as much as the water or stone paths. Birds call softly in the distance as you meander along a shaded canal lined with reeds. Water trickles over tiny stone spouts, creating a hypnotic, almost ASMR-like rhythm that draws your attention to the present moment. You notice patterns in the sunlight, small beams filtering through papyrus stalks, casting dancing shadows on the smooth stones. Fringe theories suggest that these subtle light effects were intentionally designed to enhance meditation or ritual, though some historians argue that it was simply an aesthetic choice. You lean back, feeling the gentle hum of life in the garden, observing the way every sound, shadow, and scent contributes to a slow, calming sensory experience. A gardener adjusts a small trellis, guiding flowering vines to form gentle arches over pathways. You duck under one, feeling the soft brush of petals against your forehead, and notice the serene smile of the gardener, content with the precise arc of growth. Some fringe accounts mention that these arches were symbolic doorways, guiding both humans and spirits through sacred spaces, though there's debate over whether this belief was universal or localized to specific palaces. You feel yourself walking deliberately, following not just paths, but the subtle choreography of design, letting your pace sync with the garden's rhythm. You pause near a small stone basin, its surface covered with floating petals. The scent is faintly sweet and calming, and you realize that the Egyptians understood the psychological power of fragrance, using it in both leisure and ritual. You dip a finger in the water, feeling its coolness contrast with the warmth of stone under your hand, and watch the ripples carry petals in soft, spiraling patterns. Historians still argue whether scent was primarily ceremonial or simply a pleasant luxury, but the sensory experience is undeniable. You inhale deeply, letting your breath synchronize with the slow, hypnotic motion of water and petals. In the late afternoon, the garden shadows lengthen, creating pockets of shade that shift gradually across pools, paths, and flower beds. You notice a priest and an apprentice carefully noting sunlight patterns, using them to determine optimal planting spots for the next season. There's a subtle humor in imagining the apprentice's frustration when a mischievous frog interrupts measurement and splashes water onto carefully arranged reeds. Fringe theories suggest that some gardeners embedded symbolic markers in the garden's layout, invisible to the casual visitor, to teach lessons about time, order, or cosmic cycles. You find yourself observing both nature and human interaction in equal measure, the combination creating a gentle, almost hypnotic cadence. As the sun dips lower, golden light glints off the lotus pools, turning the water into a tapestry of amber and green. You notice small insects skimming the surface, casting delicate shadows that join the interplay of light and water. The air is filled with soft scents of herbs, mud, and flower petals, and you feel a quiet sense of completeness. Life observed, ordered, and celebrated in microcosm. Some historians debate whether the gardens were primarily for elite contemplation or community utility, but here the effect is universal, a slow, immersive journey through scent, sound, and sight. By evening, shadows from the towering papyrus stalks stretch across the ground, merging with fading sunlight to create a soft, warm glow. Birds settle among reeds, frogs croak a steady lullaby, and the gentle trickle of water completes a soothing symphony. You stroll along winding paths, mindful of each footfall on warm stone, each gentle breeze brushing against your skin, and the subtle movements of petals in the water. Quirky observations: the frog that leaps at the wrong moment, the dragonfly skimming too close, the slight wobble in a petal's shadow add life and gentle humor to the precise, orderly environment. Finally, you pause at the garden's exit, feeling the day's warmth and calm settle into your body. The interplay of sunlight, shadow, fragrance, and sound has created a slow, immersive meditation, a tactile, visual, and olfactory exploration that blends observation, ritual, and quiet amusement. You take one last deep breath, noticing the way every element, stick, shadow, petal, ripple, contributes to a subtle mastery of time, space, and life itself. The garden, like the village and temple before it, leaves you with a gentle, reflective sense of harmony and calm, a perfect segue into the next chapter of shadow, observation, and human ingenuity.